Hi everyone, and welcome to the Golden Path Bootcamp. I came up with this idea to do a series of instructables, let's say, and a series of videos on how to program, starting with the fundamentals of programming and moving towards this um, goal of web development, right? And we are going to develop web apps, well, for the web. Um, and so first, if you're not too sure what is web development, let's start with what is a web app? I think that will give us a kind of broad idea of what web development is. So web apps run in browsers. Personally, my favorite browser is Google Chrome. There are many different browsers. I think if you are on an Apple device, you're using Safari most probably, or you can be using uh, Opera or uh, Microsoft Edge that comes natively with Microsoft. But there are many different browsers, and most browsers are capable of running web apps. At least the major ones, the vast majority of them should be able to run web apps. So what is a web app, right? The first web app I can think of is Twitter, right? There are others like Facebook, YouTube, um, Amazon, right? If you're e-commerce, if you're buying things online, we call that e-commerce. Um, Netflix, entertainment. So I think most of us have interacted with web apps of some kind. Um, and as I previously mentioned before, they run on browsers. So when we are actually creating our web app, we are going to be hosting it to the web, and we will be running them on a browser like Chrome or like Edge. So I like Chrome, so I would suggest that if you're going to be doing this, have Chrome installed. In fact, we need a few things installed, but I will be going through them step by step through this video. But I will not be showing you how to install Chrome. So what you can do is you can actually, if you don't already have Chrome, just go on YouTube and search the question how to install Chrome, and then we may continue. It's not absolutely vital that you have Chrome. I would just recommend it just in case you have a browser that doesn't support uh, some of the things that we are doing. Okay, right. So when I think of a web app, I think of three distinct things that work together to give us what we see. Okay, so when we open a website, let's say Nike.com, right? I like Nike shoes, so I often go on Nike.com just to see what's going on. And so when we open Nike.com, we're greeted with a few things. We might see different things, like at the top we might see a menu bar where there's like different things we can do, where there's sometimes you'll see a home button, stuff like that. And then on the page itself, we're greeted with, I think the first thing you're usually greeted with when you're going on these corporate websites, they have like a kind of slideshow, right, with pictures, right, lots of different pictures that you can go through, scroll through left and right. They probably do it automatically. Like every few seconds, you might notice that it switches to a new picture. It might have different sections and articles on the left, maybe more adverts on the right. But as you can see, a website, you can think of what you see as a collection of different components, right? But as I was saying previously, when I think of it, it's composed of three distinct things. The first thing I think of is HTML, right? Let me just use a different color for this, right? So first thing I think of is HTML. Second thing I think of is CSS. The last thing I think of is JavaScript, or I'm just going to write there JS. It's also common to just call it JS if you're feeling lazy. Right. So let's begin with the first one, HTML. And HTML is all of the content that is there. Think of it as everything that's there, right? So, for example, here we have like a header. So in this HTML code, I just draw a page here. Imagine that this page contains all the HTML code, and it has things like a header, right? It might have a different section here for the pictures. It might have a different section for the articles. And the article itself might have text in it. Like, for example, I'm just going to write here, Nike shoes are the best. I'm not sponsored, by the way. Although I think I should show them this. Maybe I can get some sponsorship. Right. So HTML in and of itself is just it's just the components of the website. There is no styling, right? And that's where CSS comes in, right? So think of HTML as content, and think of CSS as the styling. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, perhaps you want your header to be a certain color. Maybe you want this to be pink. Maybe you want home to be a specific kind of font. Maybe you want these pictures to display in this kind of slideshow configuration that we have here that can go left or right, right? Maybe you want the text here, this article, to sit on the left side of the page, right? And maybe you want these adverts to sit on the right. That all happens in CSS. You're telling the browser how to display your HTML. So you can think of things like fonts and layout. I think these are the two most important things that I think of when I conceive of CSS. Okay, so let's move on to JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is what we would call the programming part of it, the doing stuff, right? So there are two types of websites. I can think of two different kinds of websites. So the first one I can think of is dynamic. And the second kind of website that I can think of is static, right? And Static websites are just, they don't do anything. They're static. They just kind of sit there. Sure, you can navigate through the website, but you can't really do anything. Like in Twitter, you can post a tweet. In Amazon, you can make a purchase. On Nike.com, you can read some articles, right? These are different things that you can do on these websites. Well, I should correct myself. I meant to say on the Nike website, you can scroll through pictures using an interface. Like for example, here there might be two arrows that point left and right, so you can cycle through these pictures. When you click right, it should bring this picture into focus and push this one in the background, for example. And that's where JavaScript comes in. When you interact with the website and you tell it to do things. So now this is kind of, we can think of this as the architecture of a website. And what I want to do in this series is I don't want to spend too much time on theory. I like to learn by doing. So let's just jump into it. Let's write our first web application. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to install Microsoft Visual Studio Code. It's very important that you get it right, because you could install the wrong thing, because Microsoft also has Microsoft Visual Studio, and they sound much the same. And often when I ask people to download this specific program, they will download the wrong one, the Microsoft Visual Studio. The one that we want is Microsoft Visual Studio Code. Sometimes people just call this VS or VS Code. Right. So make sure it is the full thing, right? Like this whole thing, the Microsoft, oops, typo, Microsoft Visual Studio Code, not Visual Studio. That is not what we want. Now, why are we installing this? Well, Microsoft Visual Studio Code, or VS Code, is a development environment. So that's where we are actually going to be coding. It makes our life a little bit easier. It's very popular. It is, at least for JavaScript, at least for JavaScript, it is the most used development environment. There are other development environments, and I encourage you to try them out and see what suits you best. But for the purposes of this, we're going to be using something that I'm familiar with, that I'm comfortable with, Microsoft Visual Studio Code. Right. So let's install it. Oh, actually, we're not going to use Edge, we're going to use Chrome. Okay. And search for, well, Microsoft Visual Studio Code. Right, here it is. So just make sure that the link that you're clicking on is not an ad, that it is the actual website, code.visualstudio.com. Okay, and we're going to be installing, I assume the vast majority of people here are going to be using Windows, so we're going to be installing the Windows version. There's a download button there. Oh, it takes me right back here. Okay, what's going on? Oh, it was downloading already. Silly me. Okay, so let's cancel this one. Okay, so we go through the application installation, accept the agreements. I'm going to create a desktop icon because I like that. And I'm going to hit install. Okay. And it should start automatically if you've, I think that box is ticked by default, so it should start. So this is my Visual Studio. And just going to make this full screen. When you open it, you'll see like some release notes. And just as an aside, Visual Studio is constantly being worked on. So now and again, you will be prompted to update your Visual Studio. You can choose to update it, or you may choose not to and continue using it as it is. I mean, if something's not broken, why fix it? But I usually update it to the newest version just to see if there are any new features that I might find interesting. So now what we need to do is we need to open a new file. So I go here, I go up to File, and I go to Open Folder. Now let's go to my desktop. Now this folder that I want to create a folder. I did click on Open Folder, but what we're doing here is we're going to create a folder. So once you have this window open, right-click somewhere and go to New. Click on Folder. It's going to create a new folder, and it will also allow you to rename this folder. Right? So I'm going to call this My First Website. Oh, there we go. So you select the folder that you've just created, click on Select Folder. It'll ask you if you trust the author of the folder. Yeah, you can say yes, I trust them. All right, great. So now what you see on your screen, on the left side of your screen, you see this panel called the Explorer panel right here. And this is how you're going to explore your files and folders that you're going to create. Right now, there's nothing in it. See, it's empty. My First Website, if I open it, it's completely empty. But as I said, when I think of a website, we think of three things. We think of the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript. So to start with, we're going to create an HTML file. And how you're going to do that is you're going to click on the new file icon here. And you're going to create an HTML file. Traditionally, when you're creating a website, you would call it index. Although you can call it anything that you want at this point. I'm just out of the sake of habit, I'm going to call it index.html. Right? So that when you put the .html file extension on this, you are telling the computer and you're also telling Visual Studio Code that, hey, I'm about to write HTML code, right? So you don't really need to follow in depth what is going on here. Explanations will be provided later on. The goal here is just to get a simple web application or website up and running and see how the different components interact with one another and display it on a browser to get us started. As I said, I like to learn by doing and then learning later on. So that will be the format. We will be doing and then the explanation will come afterwards. Okay. So I think before we start coding, this is a good point to grab yourself a cup of tea or some kind of refreshment. I know I am. So see you in a bit. Okay, great. I hope you've stocked up on some refreshments. Okay, so we're going to be writing our first code, our first website. And what you want to do is, HTML is written in a series of tags, right? So a tag is some text enclosed by these two arrows, the left and the right. You can find it on the bottom right of your keyboard. Okay, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go exclamation point doctype HTML, right? The next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to press, so here I'm going to press enter to go to the next line, all right? And again, I'm going to write HTML, and I'm going to close it. And once I close it, look what Visual Studio did. It automatically made a new tag, another HTML tag. Although if you look closely, this one is different. It has a slash in it. This is a close tab. And so Visual Studio knows that if you're going to be making an opening tag, you have to have a closing tag. So it does it automatically, right? And so let's do that again, just to show it to you again. I'm going to write HTML, right? Close it, automatically creates that tab. And at this point, I'm going to just press enter, right? That takes it down to the bottom. This does two things. It gives me a new line, but it also moves ahead a few spaces. This is called an indent, right? And you can create an indent by just pressing tab. Press tab, you see how it jumps a few spaces. I believe it's 4 spaces that it jumps. Oops, HTML, right? Oh my God, it auto-completed it again. But yeah, just to show you a third time, press enter here, and it does an automatic indent. So you can immediately start typing the next thing that you need to do, which is the head. Right, and again, it will automatically create the closing tag, pardon me. It'll automatically create the closing tag. And here in the head, what we're going to do is we're going to put the title, right? That is, so don't get confused. The title does not show up on the website that you see. It is what I would call like additional information or kind of metadata. We'll go into more detail at a later stage of what title does. But this is just the title for your HTML. Think of it that way. It is not the title that you're going to see on your website. Okay, so we're just going to call this, what should we call this? Golden path, right? See how it goes in between the closing, in between the opening tag and the closing tag, right there in the middle. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to create the body. And the body is where everything goes. Like all of the content of the website, the stuff that you see is in the body. Right, press enter, it does an indent. Right, and here we're going to create a new kind of tag. It's called a paragraph tag. So to get a paragraph tag, we just write P, and that creates the closing tag, right? But now this tag is a bit special. We're going to give it an ID, right? So I'm going to go inside the opening tag itself, inside the tag, not between them, inside it. And I'm going to write ID is equal to, what should we call this? Oh, sorry, my keyboard is set to the wrong standard. Let me just change that. Okay, no matter. I'll live with it. And we're going to call this example. The paragraph has to contain something. I'm just going to write this paragraph is empty, quite paradoxically. All right, now that's it, right? So that is HTML, or at least for this, for the purposes here, this is it, we're done. So we're going to save this. Press Control S so you can go up here, File, Save. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to open it. So there are two ways you can do this. You can go to your desktop. A quicker way is you right-click on index.html. You go to Reveal in File Explorer here near the top. It shows you index.html. I want to open this with Chrome, so let's do that. Open with. There it is. That's our website showing this paragraph is empty because that's all we've done, right? Now for the next step, we want to do a few things. We want to incorporate some style into this. Actually, no. What we're going to do is next, I want to save style for another lesson. We're just going to put in some JavaScript, right? Okay, so now there are two ways to use JavaScript in your website. The first way is to create a separate JavaScript file and then reference it from your HTML. And the second way is what we call an embed, where you actually write the script inside your HTML file, right? So we're going to do the second method, the embedding, where we're going to write it in here. But in later examples, I'll show you how to do the separate file and referencing it. Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, your script goes in your body, right? So let's just do our script somewhere in the body. Let's do it at the bottom. By the way, ideally you should be doing your scripts at the bottom of your body. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to say let my variable equal to hello world. The next thing that I want to say is, oh, and by the way, some of this might be new to you. Don't worry about it too much just yet. I know it's quite daunting, but in the next few lessons, we will be going through exactly what is JavaScript and how to write JavaScript and how to order your programs and stuff like that. But for now, I just want to give you a broad level overview and show you how you can use HTML and JavaScript to do different things on your browser. Okay. So what I want to do here is I want to change this text to say something else, right? Instead of saying this paragraph is empty, I want it to say hello world, right? So what we're doing now is we've created a variable. We've said let this variable equal hello world. And now we need to tell, we need to reference it rather to this PID, right? This paragraph tag with an ID of an example. So this is where the ID comes into play. We're giving it a kind of identity. So we know how to reference it. So let me show you how to do that. We go document dot get element. Oh, you can see that Visual Studio Code does have kind of predictive, what should I call it? Predictive text completion. It can predict what broadly you're going to write. So if I just click that, it's going to give me get element by ID, which is exactly what I want. And open brackets, we need to put in the ID that we had. So it's example. So I'm just going to copy it from here, pop it in there. And then we go dot inner HTML. Again, it auto-completes. And we're going to set this equal to my variable, right? And you can see now how Visual Studio Code makes our lives a little bit easier by giving us this predictive text. It knows that we created a variable called my variable, so as soon as I start typing my, it references it. So you can go my variable, and if you press tab, it completes it automatically, or you can click on it. Right, so that, if we've done everything correctly, that should be it. I'm going to press save. And if we open up that same website, we don't need to open it again. It's already open. All we need to do now is refresh. And when you press refresh, you can see it's giving us hello world. So yeah, well done. Congratulations. If you've followed this through and you've gotten this result, you've written your first web app, believe it or not. It doesn't look like much, but it has all the components that you need to write a working and functional web app. So take care, and I'll see you in the next session.